For us as the foundation, it's a moment for us to reflect as a nation. We have to take ourselves back and not just reminisce about the past for its sake, but rather think, what does the future hold? What does the next 30 years look like? That's why in the three-part event that we're going to be hosting, first part would be of the reception committee, who will be at Victor Verster, and they will then be looking back to 30 years ago. What did they have to do to prepare for Nelson Mandela's release? But of course, the most important thing was logistically. What do you do with 20,000 people having to converge in one place, and us all having to make sure that nothing goes wrong? Interestingly, I was with Dennis Goldberg earlier on today, and he said that the most fascinating thing about something like that is that you have 20,000 people gathered in one place. It just takes one person doing a wrong move, and things go wrong. And he said the reason they didn't go wrong is that people understood that the moment was too important. The event was too important. And that's what we'll be doing, reflecting on that moment 30 years ago. Then we will move from there, come to the City Hall. We will have a two-part program. We have invited the Nobel laureate Lima Bowie from Liberia, who will then be addressing what we call prisons of Africa, both literal and figurative. And it's these literal prisons where Mandela rules were introduced by the United Nations to say we have to treat prisoners with humanity, with humanely treat prisoners. As Madiba said, that you can only judge a society by how it treats its worst citizens, being prisoners. But the second part of that is also looking at other kinds of prisons. The prisons that include poverty and inequality, racism, xenophobia. What do we need to do differently? The last part is when the president will then come and speak. And you'll remember that 30 years ago, he was holding the mic for President Mandela. And this time he will then be holding his own mic, speaking to us about what liberation means, and that we still have a long way to go in terms of attaining our freedom because of high levels of unemployment, high levels of inequality and poverty that are afflicting our country. So hopefully with this event, we will then do what Dennis Goldberg also mentioned today, that none of us should relax as citizens. That we forgot that day, when Madiba came out of prison, he said, I'm giving the rest of my living years to you, the people, as your servant. And that it's time that we then take that as a people, as politicians, as individuals, seriously.
I mean, I remember that day quite well, and it was a time of hope. Many believed that it was a game-changing moment. It was the biggest story in the world, not just South Africa. And I wonder of the generations that have followed, when you take them back to that moment, I suppose it's trying to find a context, find a meaning for what then happened in the decades that followed.
Precisely, and I think that moment was a game changer indeed, in its own way. But what we didn't do was to follow through on that game changer. And now we need new game changing moments. Again, I want to refer to what Dennis Goldberg said earlier on. He said that what we have forgotten as citizens, as people, that politics are too important to leave to politicians alone. So that's a game-changing statement. We need to then be thinking differently about politics. How do we contribute meaningfully to making sure that our politics are right? But then also, how do we make sure that we deal with poverty and inequality, corruption and other stuff? We need a game changer. And I like your use of that phrase, because it means that for us to move forward, we have to do things differently. We have to find that thing that we might have lost along the way, that makes us a different people, people who are hopeful, people like who follow what Bishop Mpumlwana calls Madiba the ancestor of hope, that Madiba wrote in letters while he was in prison, writing to his daughters that don't worry about me now, I'm happy, I'm well, full of strength and hope. The letter was written in '69, Madiba had only served 7 years in prison. He still had 20 more years to go. Surely if Madiba could hold on to hope, we have no reason not to hold on to hope. But hope alone is not enough. We have to work hard as a nation to help build a country of Madiba's dreams.
All right, and perhaps finally, what do you remember personally of that day, and how you felt and what it meant for you?
You know, I was born in a little mining town in the northwest, and I remember that when the announcement came through way back on the 2nd of Feb, there was anticipation, and on the day we then had marches, sporadic marches that were then organized. But then at that point, we then sat in front of television. We didn't have a television at home, so we all scrambled around, went to neighbors' houses, and I can just imagine how every neighbor couldn't enjoy their lounge because we were glued onto this TV to see the Nelson Mandela, the person we didn't know who he was, how he looked like, and he finally walked out of prison. So it's a proud moment because today we can look back and say the things that happened in Northwest back then would never happen again, where I was called the K word as a child, where I had a gun, just hit with a gun, back of a gun to my forehead because of a racist policeman who didn't see me as a child, but just as a black animal, basically. And that bit of our history, we will be looking back at and saying, never again will we go back there. But that the next generation, those who are still to be born, must then find a more prosperous South Africa, corruption-free, one which is crime-free, and that one that cares about the vulnerable.
All right, that was Sello Hatang taking us back in time to when he was young and remembering that moment, of course, when Nelson Mandela took his first steps as he walked out of Victor Verster Prison after 27 years in incarceration.